it's me again. I'm going to continue reading from my book, Secret Lives of the First Ladies. Okay, let's go! Lord of the Ring. The Johnson wedding in 1934 was a hastily arranged affair with little preparation. In fact, Lyndon had forgotten even to get a ring to put on his bride's finger. After realizing this in a church, he sent a friend to get one. The man returned with a collection of cheap jewelry from Sears, from which Lady Bird picked out a real beaut, worth $2.50. Damn. Sticky rice. Lady Bird had never learned how to cook before getting married, and it would be a while before she became any good at it. One of Johnson's first dinner guests, the wife of Congressman Murray Maverick, was stunned to discover a cookbook in Lady Bird's kitchen open to a recipe for boiled rice. Lady Bird apparently couldn't even get that right, however. The woman later claimed that after that evening, she always connected boiled rice with library paste. No time for injuries. Lyndon owed a lot to Lady Bird for his 1948 Senate victory. She had become an extremely engaged and energetic campaigner, a woman who went right to the people, shook hands, worked the phones, and more. Nothing exemplifies her sense of purpose more dramatically than the car accident she suffered on her way to make an appearance in San Antonio. After pulling herself out of the wreck, the vehicle had rolled twice. She hitched a ride, changed it to a dress borrowed from one of the women at the rally, proceeded to give her first statewide broadcast on behalf of Lyndon. Only after all that was accomplished did she find it prudent to make a trip to the hospital for x-rays. Fortunately, she suffered a little more than scratches. Nice. She's tough. Inside and out. Damn. Crestfallen. Lady Bird's favorite television show was Gunsmoke. She almost never missed an episode. Even after learning to her horror that James Arness, the program's star, was a Republican. Wow. That just shows you. Even public people, people running for any type of Senate seat or whatever, they don't always care what your status is. Now, the Mink Coat Mob. One of the most sensational events of Johnson's 1960 vice presidential campaign was also one of its ugliest. Lyndon and Lady Bird were in Dallas just days before the election when they found themselves confronted by a crowd of wealthy local women who were very well dressed, very conservative, and very angry with Johnson's liberal agenda. By the time the Johnsons and their companions had gone through the mob, Lady Bird had been spat upon and smacked on the head with a sign reading, "Let's ground Lady Bird." Mrs. Josh, shocked at their rage and disgusting behavior, began to shout back at them until her husband clamped his hand over her mouth. This inspired sympathy and admiration for the Johnson and newspapers. But running that gauntlet was one of the most trying moments of Lady Bird's life. I can't believe they didn't talk about the Vietnam chant that the young folks were chanting about LBJ. The chant goes this. I don't always remember it because of my abusive ex-best friend. She made me watch videos and read. Actually, most of those watch videos and movies and whatnot about the different presidents and whatnot. So it's always stuck in my head. The chant goes as this. LBJ, LBJ, how many kids are you getting killed today? And I can't believe they didn't talk about that. But yeah. Chapter 33. Pat Nixon. March 16, 1912 through June 22, 1993. Married June 21st, 1940. Presidential husband Richard Milhous Nixon. Children Patricia and Julie. First Lady 1969 to 1974. Astrological signs Pisces. God damn it. Oh well. Religion Catholic, then Quaker. Soundbite. Oh, but you just don't realize how much fun he is. He's just so much fun. On her husband in a television interview. Pat Nixon visited 29 nations during her tenure as First Lady, and often made headlines by immersing herself in local customs. When Richard Nixon announced his loss in the 1960 presidential campaign to John Kennedy, cameras caught the tears in the eyes of his wife, Pat. She had plenty to cry about. The race had been incredibly close. So close, in fact, that Pat Nixon unsuccessfully tried to convince her husband to fight for a recount. But more importantly, she had to face the ugly fact that all the exhausting campaign work she'd done during the past year had been for naught. A frustrating revelation indeed, for it was the sort of work she abhorred. Thelma Catherine Pat Ryan was no stranger to hard work. She and her two older brothers were born in Nevada but grew up in California after their father, William Ryan, gave up life as a miner to run a farm outside of Los Angeles. Pat had little time for play. She spent much of her childhood picking vegetables to help keep the family in the black. Life was much easier back at the house where William tended to get drunk and pick fights with his wife, Kate. After Mrs. Ryan died from cancer, Pat, 13 years old, began running the household in her stead and still managed to devote enough time to her schoolwork to earn high grades. Mr. Ryan died when Pat was 17, leaving his daughter to pay her own way through Fullerton Junior College by working as a cleaning lady at a bank. Eager for travel and adventure, Pat interrupted her college education to travel to New York City. She convinced an elderly couple to let her drive them east in their equally aged Packard, for which she would pay enough money to get back to California by bus. She ended up staying in New York for 2 years, however, during which she dated often, studied radiology at Columbia, and got a job as an X-ray technician. Though Gotham was obliged, she went back west in 1933 to complete her education at the University of Southern California, paying her way as usual through odd jobs: dental assistant, telephone operator, store clerk. After graduating with honors and a teaching certificate, she moved to Whittier, California to teach typing in the local high school. Pat had modeled good looks and impressed a few movie directors with her acting ability in bit roles. Though her career in film didn't interest her, it was her fondness for occasional acting that ended up changing her life forever. While auditioning for a role in one of Whittier's local acting tropes, she met a fellow immature player named Richard Milhous Nixon. Enchanted by the tall redhead, Nixon asked her out almost as soon as he saw her, but Pat gave him the brush off with the time, "I'm busy." I'm like, "You shouldn't have said that," he retorted, "because someday I'm going to marry you." Awesome. Pat thought he was some kind of nut job and put the awkward incident behind her. But Dick, while very probably a nut job, was entirely serious about pursuing Pat, which he proceeded to do with impressive tenacity for the next 2.5 years. He waited for her while she went on other dates, endured her oblivious toward him, and kept at her until she came around. After they got married in 1940 in a Quaker ceremony, she was classic but embraced Dick's phase. Pat continued to teach while her husband got his law practice underway. Money was tight. With America's entry to World War II, they both went to work for the Office of Price Administration in Washington, D.C. After Dick joined the Navy, Pat traveled with him from base to base and continued her work for the OPA after he went overseas. With a lifetime experience, working hard and managing her tight Pat handled her busy schedule of homemaking and breadwinning easily. What she didn't handle so easily was Dick's decision to enter politics. In 1945, California Republicans approached him with the idea of running for the United States House of Representatives. Pat went along on the strict condition that she never be required to make political speeches and that their family's privacy never be intruded upon. Dick agreed. Pat should have asked for this agreement in writing. If she was wary of the political world in 1946, she would in time come to hate it with visceral passion. Dick's tactics only made it worse. His congressional campaigns in 1946, 1948, and the 1950 run for the Senate were full of mudslinging and unsavory accusations that soon in the epithet Tricky Dick. Nixon had always been an extremely self-confident and ambitious man who believed he was destined for the White House, one of the qualities that drew him to Pat in the first place. But his drive for results at any price, especially his work chasing communists for the House Un-American Activities Committee, attracted the sort of controversy and attention that Pat wanted most to avoid. And yet he couldn't have done any of it without her. Right from the beginning in 1946, she was his most valuable worker. She ran his campaign offices, researched opponents' strengths and weaknesses, typed up pamphlets and mailed them out, and donated what little savings she had to his election. And that was just a half of it. By 1948, she had 2 daughters to raise. Pat struggled to run their household on a small budget, did all the cooking and cleaning herself, and even made all the curtains and slipcovers for their home in Washington. It was a lot of work, to say the least, and Pat did it all without complaining. After years of tolerating the early birly and wearing forced smiles at public appearances, Pat finally broke her silence in 1952. When Nixon was made the vice presidential candidate on the Eisenhower ticket, enough was enough. Besides, she had already exacted a promise from her husband to leave politics after the termination of his senator in 1956. But as she would do again and again, Pat gave in to her husband's ambition and then set about performing the task she loathed with extraordinary effectiveness. In fact, the only thing stronger than her detestation of politics was support for Dick. When he was accused of taking personal advantage of inappropriate contributions, Eisenhower insisted he make a national television appearance to defuse the situation. Dick would have preferred to just bow out, but Pat insisted that he go through with it. If he didn't, she warned, his career would be over. The TV spot worked, and Nixon became vice president. For all his negative opinions about being a political wife, Pat was damn good at it. Indeed, she may have well been the most extraordinary second lady in American history. President Eisenhower, who never liked Nixon very much, decided to get him out of Washington by sending him on a tour of the world as America's goodwill ambassador. His peregrinations were a major triumph, mostly because Pat came along. From Asia to South America to Russia, Mrs. Nixon was a paragon of graciousness, composure, and elegance. She made a habit of traveling to locations barred to local women, subtly but effectively spreading the message of feminism. She even held the first press conference ever arranged for women reporters in Japan. Pat had a gift that her had lacked: the ability to reach people, to look them in the eye, remember their names, put them at ease, and connect with them. President Eisenhower praised her. The press adored her, and Dick, well, he pushed her right into a run for the presidency itself in 1960. Heavy sigh. Without doubt, Pat's popularity was a major asset to Nixon, who racked up plenty of enemies and who struck even some of his supporters as aloof and abrasive. The Republicans exploited her image to the hilt, but to no avail. Nixon lost to Kennedy, one of the closest races in history. To Pat, it was a traumatic and very emotional moment. She was exhausted by the campaign, pained by America's rejection of her dear husband, and really sick and tired of all the political nonsense that had put their family through so much. The long desired return to private life came as a tremendous relief. Dick took up with a Los Angeles law firm, and unbeknownst to his wife, began planning a political comeback. In 1962, When Pat heard from him over dinner with friends that he planned to run for governor of California, she left the table in tears. They moved to New York City after a loss, finally convincing Pat that her husband's political delusions were at it. She is reported as saying by this time that if he ever ran for office again, she would kill herself. Wow. Heedless as ever of his wife's deepest desires, Dick Nixon ran for president again in 1960. There are a couple of reasons why Pat didn't choke down a bottle of sleep pills. First, despite her husband's self-absorption, she loved him. And second, she felt, as Dick did, that a certain amount of vengeance was in order. The 1960 fiasco was a close-run thing, leaving Nixon with a bad taste in their mouths that they now saw an opportunity to wash away with sweet victory. Besides, Pat knew that no amount of pleading would dissuade her husband from going for it. And so once again, the tough Irish lass, who'd known years of emotional repression and self-sacrifice, would go the distance once more. One more time. And this time around, it would prove to be more than even she could take. Nixon's very comfortable 1968 electoral victory began on 1.5 term presidency that began graciously and ended disastrously. It wasn't until around his 1972 re-election, another huge electoral victory that offers testament to his impressive first term, that the Watergate scandal and the seemingly interminable prolongation of the Vietnam War conspired to blow his administration to pieces. But Pat Nixon eventually caught heat by association for her husband's explosive problems. Her first ladyship stands in stark contrast to Nixon's presidency. Pat showed more of the grace and sheer pluck that distinguished her years as vice presidential spouse. In her first year alone as first lady, she shook the hands of something like 250,000 Americans, logging hundreds of miles as an emissary of the president and promoting her project volunteerism, her pet project volunteerism. She answered heaps of mail from ordinary citizens and used her influence to get action on their requests. No first lady had ever traveled so. Pat visited 29 nations, covering nearly 1,200 miles. In Vietnam, she risked her life on the front line to visit wounded troops. In Africa, she was welcomed like royalty and made headlines by donning local dress. And for her husband's history-making trip to China, she read Chairman Mao's Little Red Book from cover to cover to familiarize herself with the country's political atmosphere. She was struck out on her own turf by publicly advocating a woman for the Supreme Court, endorsing the Equal Rights Amendment for women, and wearing trousers for a magazine photo shoot. Nixon hated trousers on women. Unlike her husband, Pat was popular with virtually everyone, and for good reason. She was as gregarious, hardworking, and engaging as ever. It wasn't long before one Nixon advisor asked a colleague, "If we can't approve the president's public image, what do you say we drop him and run Mrs. Nixon?" Oh my God. They'd rather have Mrs. Nixon run for president than the actual effing president himself. Wow. If only that had been possible. After a connection was made between the administration and a bunch of immature cloak and dagger bozos who broke into the Democratic National Committee's headquarters in the Watergate building, things started going downhill for Nixon. His wife remained as popular as ever with the press, but she increasingly found herself pressured to make statements about Watergate. She refused, and there was fault. Denied access to the details by her husband, who had never really shared much with her when it came to political business, and compelled to put on a good face despite all the pressure. The first lady soldiered on with a forced smile that had become her specialty and was soon being called Plastic Pat. All her worst fears about Dick's political career were coming true. Their privacy was invaded, his integrity was questioned, and their daughters were forced to deal with all. The growing tangle of investigations infuriated and exhausted her, leading to believe that a conspiracy was afoot. Nixon eventually decided to resign. The decision hit Pat like a freight train. And now you know why people say, I'm not a crook. It's because of Nixon. Yeah, Nixon stated that on public television about the Watergate scandal. Saying, no, I'm not a crook. Even though there's not video, but voice recordings of him talking about the plans and whatnot. During the following months of Nixon administration, Pat became a recluse, driven from the limelight by confusion, grief, and anger. She wanted to get out of politics, but not like this. Watergate continued to hound him even in retirement, and Pat responded by drawing herself further into seclusion in the San Clemente, California home. She suffered a stroke in 1976, from which she managed to gain control of her health once again through sheer hard work and exercise. After moving to New York City and then to New Jersey, Pat continued to experience health problems. They finally claimed her in 1993. If only because we know that Dick shared little of his official life with her, it is virtually assured that Pat Nixon knew nothing of the details of the Watergate break-in. She, along with every other American, shared a sense of national shame that defined that troubled era. But for her, the shame was exacerbated by the fact that she had placed her own desires behind his for so long. An epic sacrifice that was rewarded by scandal and humiliation. God damn. And she still stayed by his side. I say that's one hell of a woman. Nixon had himself one hell of a woman. Because most people, when they hear about that sort of thing, they would have broken up or divorced their spouse. But she's a keeper. She stayed by his side even after everything. Well. So anyways, please rate, comment, and subscribe down below. And please ring that bell notification if you're on YouTube, so that you can know when I upload. And if you're on TikTok, please like and follow my videos. And when we get to 50 followers on TikTok and 50 subscribers on YouTube, then get this something special for y'all, okay? So let's get to 50. Whee! And please pay for something on either my eBay and or my car, okay? Bye!